It began on a summer night thick with magnolia and suspicion. The colonel's wife gave birth to twins, one pale as ivory, the other dark as river silt. The midwife froze. The colonel stared. And from that moment, whispers began crawling through the walls of Ashford plantation like a sickness with no cure. The cries came before dawn. The great house was still, the air heavy with the heat of late June. Downstairs, a candle flickered in the birthing room where Elizabeth Ashford clung to the bedpost, her face slick with sweat. Two midwives worked quietly beside her, their hands trembling. Outside, the cicadas screamed. Colonel Nathaniel Ashford paced the veranda, his boots striking the boards in rhythm with his wife's contractions. A war hero turned planter. His temper was the stuff of rumor, steady until it wasn't. The enslaved servants kept their distance, listening from the shadows, knowing that any sound, any wrong glance, could summon his rage. Then it happened. Two cries, seconds apart. The midwife emerged first, pale as linen. "Twins, sir," she said, her voice breaking. "Two healthy boys." But something in her tone made the colonel's jaw tighten. He stormed inside. Elizabeth lay motionless, exhausted but smiling faintly. Beside her rested the twins, both breathing, both perfect in form, but as different as day and night. One child's skin gleamed light and pink, the other's deep and coppered. Their tiny fists opened and closed in unison, as if mocking the stunned silence around them. Colonel Ashford's voice cut through the air. "What trick is this?" The midwives shrank back. Elizabeth turned her head away, her lips trembling. "Explain it," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Explain how two sons of mine come from the same womb, but one carries a stranger's face." Elizabeth wept silently. "Nathaniel, please." He stared at her, at the woman he had paraded through town as the image of Southern virtue, and something inside him cracked. The colonel turned to the servants gathered at the door. His eyes swept over them like a drawn blade. Then he stopped. His gaze lingered on one man, tall, broad-shouldered, his skin the same dark hue as the newborn's. The colonel said nothing, but every soul in that room felt the temperature drop. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the bayou, carrying the scent of rain. Inside, the house of Ashford stood still, suspended between love, betrayal, and the storm to come. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if the bloodline you'd built your world on suddenly looked you in the eye and defied you? The days that followed were suffocating. The summer sun hung low and cruel, baking the plantation grounds until the earth itself seemed to whisper. Inside the manor, however, the silence was far worse than the heat. Colonel Nathaniel Ashford spoke little after that night. His boots echoed through the halls with slow, deliberate weight, each step a reminder that his silence was never peace. It was pressure, building. The household felt it. The servants avoided his gaze, the kitchen quieted at his approach, and even the hounds in the yard grew uneasy. Elizabeth stayed confined to her room, pale and hollow-eyed. The twins slept beside her in their carved cradle, two small symbols of a truth she could no longer hide. Each time she looked at them, one light, one dark, her heart ached with the same question that haunted the colonel: how long before the world saw? Rumors began as whispers between the field hands, but by the week's end, they had spread to the nearby town. Some said the devil had cursed the Ashford line. Others murmured that the colonel's blood had finally been tainted by the very people he enslaved. Nathaniel began watching, always watching. At meals, he would stare at Elizabeth until she looked away. He studied the children's faces with military precision, counting features, tracing resemblances, noting each shade of skin in different lights. He kept a logbook on his desk where he wrote obsessively dates, weather, descriptions. Even the doctor's notes were copied and annotated. At night, the servants heard him walking the halls long after midnight, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Sometimes he would stop outside the nursery door and stand there for what felt like hours. One afternoon, a servant named Isaiah, quiet, strong, with eyes that seemed older than his years, was called to repair the shutters in the nursery. Elizabeth's hands shook as she tried to keep calm. The colonel entered moments later. The air turned cold. For a long time, Nathaniel said nothing. He just looked, first at Isaiah, then at the darker twin, whose small fingers curled toward the light. His jaw clenched. His voice came low and sharp. "Leave us." Isaiah bowed his head and stepped out. But as he did, Nathaniel's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder. "I said leave," he repeated, though his tone had changed, now quiet, almost trembling. Isaiah nodded once and went down the stairs. Elizabeth's heart hammered in her chest. She knew what that look meant. The colonel's suspicion had found its shape, and it had a name. Would you have told him the truth, or waited for the storm? That was surely coming. By July, the air over Ashford plantation had turned thick enough to drink. The scent of wet earth, cane, and sweat filled every breath. But beneath it all lingered another smell, something metallic and sour, the scent of fear. Colonel Ashford had begun his silent campaign. He no longer shouted, no longer slammed his fists against the table. His fury had become something quieter, sharper, more precise. Each day he walked the grounds like a hunter circling his prey. The enslaved workers froze when they saw him coming, their eyes dropping to the soil, hands trembling around their tools. He started asking questions. Not directly, never with witnesses, but in ways that made the soul shiver. He'd stop a man in the field, stare too long, and ask about the night storms, about who was awake when his wife gave birth, about who had seen the candles burning in her window weeks before. He recorded their answers in a small leather notebook, the same one he used to document the harvest. And always, his gaze drifted back to Isaiah. Isaiah had been on the plantation for 12 years, bought young, trained as a blacksmith. Strong, steady, respected even among the overseers for his discipline. But now his silence drew attention. When others laughed nervously at the colonel's jokes, Isaiah simply bowed and walked away. That quiet dignity had once kept him alive. Now, it marked him. One night, as the cicadas sang in the trees and the lanterns burned low, the colonel stood on the balcony staring out at the fields. Below, he saw Isaiah leading 2 men toward the smithy. Nothing unusual. But then, he saw the darker twin, cradled in the arms of the nursemaid, reaching out as they passed, his tiny hand pointing toward the forge, toward Isaiah. The colonel's hand tightened on the railing until his knuckles went white. By morning, he summoned the overseer. "Keep an eye on him," he ordered. "The blacksmith. Don't speak, don't warn, just watch." From that day forward, Isaiah was never alone. Every step he took, someone followed. Every breath, someone listened. But even under that suffocating scrutiny, Isaiah never faltered. He worked in silence, hammering iron against the anvil until sparks lit the darkness like fireflies. His eyes never rose toward the house. Yet in that same house, Elizabeth was breaking. Each cry from her darker child cut deeper than the last. She could feel the colonel's fury circling closer, like thunder crawling over the horizon. And in her dreams, she began to see Isaiah's face, standing in the firelight, holding her son. Tell me, when truth and survival stand on opposite sides, which would you choose to save? By mid-August, the colonel's patience had thinned to threads. The oppressive heat did nothing to dull his suspicion. It only sharpened it. The great house that once echoed with music and laughter now felt like a tomb. Doors creaked open with caution. Whispers stopped when boots approached, and even the piano in the parlor sat silent, its keys coated in dust. Nathaniel Ashford had turned the plantation into his own tribunal. Every servant, every hand, every stable boy was summoned to his study, one by one. He questioned them not like a man seeking truth, but like a soldier rooting out spies. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. The glint in his eyes was enough to make even the bravest tremble. He would sit behind his mahogany desk, a ledger open before him, and begin with questions that seemed harmless. What time do you rise? Who tends the fields at dawn? Whose light burns after midnight? Then gradually his tone would change. Who speaks with the mistress when I am gone? Who carries messages to the house? Who lingers near the nursery window? No one dared answer truthfully. The servants learned to lie carefully, weaving half-truths that might pacify him without pointing blame. But every lie carried its own risk, every hesitation a death sentence waiting to happen. And still, his suspicions tightened around one man, Isaiah. Late one evening, the colonel called him in. The study smelled of whiskey and smoke, and the storm outside rattled the windows like unseen hands. Isaiah entered quietly, head bowed. "You've been here a long time," Nathaniel began, his voice unnervingly calm. "You know the workings of this place better than most." "Yes, sir. You've served faithfully. You've eaten at my table. You've slept under my roof. And now," he leaned forward, eyes narrowing, "I hear whispers, whispers of disobedience, of sin." Isaiah's throat tightened. "Sir, I don't." The colonel rose from his chair, circling him like a hawk. "Tell me, Isaiah, what do you see when you look at my sons?" The air went dead still. "I see God's children," Isaiah replied softly. Nathaniel's face twitched, rage restrained by pride. "Do you pray for them?" "Yes, sir, every night." The colonel smiled then. It was the kind of smile that hides a blade behind it. "Good," he whispered. "Pray harder." Isaiah bowed, turned, and left the room. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, Elizabeth appeared in the shadows, her face pale, her voice a broken whisper. "He knows," she said. Thunder cracked above them, and somewhere deep within the house, one of the twins began to cry. If you lived under that roof, would you run, or wait for the truth to find you first? The storm that night refused to end. It rolled over the bayou with the weight of a curse, shaking the shutters and filling the halls with flickering candlelight. Upstairs, Elizabeth sat alone in her room, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of her dressing table. Below, the colonel's boots echoed in the study. Steady, relentless, like the ticking of a clock counting down to judgment. She knew he would come for her soon. He always did, after the questioning. She reached for the small silver locket around her neck, a keepsake she'd told her husband was from her mother. But inside, it didn't hold a portrait of family or faith. It held a tiny curl of dark hair, her secret, her sin, her truth. Elizabeth had met Isaiah long before the twins were born, before the war, before the colonel's pride had hardened into cruelty. Back then, the plantation had still been rebuilding, and Isaiah was young, a blacksmith with hands that could bend iron but touch her as if she were made of glass. She had gone to him first. The loneliness of the house, the long months of her husband's absence, the silence that came after the miscarriages, all of it drove her towards something that felt alive. Their love was never meant to last. It was a secret written in the dust, doomed to be washed away by time. But time never erased it. It grew, and when the twins came, the truth came with them. Now she watched her children sleeping, one pale, one dark, both breathing in perfect rhythm. She wept quietly, knowing that innocence would not protect them. The colonel's rage would find them all. A sudden knock shattered her thoughts. The door creaked open and the nursemaid entered, eyes wide with fear. "Mistress, he's coming." Elizabeth stood, every muscle in her body trembling. "Take them," she whispered, "through the back hall. Hide them until morning." The nursemaid hesitated. "Where should I go?" "Anywhere but here." As the door closed behind them, Elizabeth turned toward the hallway, hearing his steps grow closer. The air seemed to thicken. The candle flame bent toward the door as if recoiling. She pressed the locket to her chest, whispering a prayer that was neither holy nor blasphemous, just desperate. "Forgive me," she said, to no one and to everyone. When the door opened, the colonel's shadow filled the room, and her secret, once whispered in the dark, was about to face the light. "Would you have confessed, knowing it could destroy everyone you loved?" The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the bones of the house. Colonel Ashford stepped. Inside, rain still dripping from his hat brim, his eyes dark with something colder than rage. Purpose. He closed the door behind him and set his gloves on the table, his silence more terrifying than any shout. Elizabeth stood near the window, her pale nightgown catching the faint glow of lightning. She did not turn to face him. Her hands were clasped tightly before her, bloodless from the pressure. "Where are the children?" he asked quietly. "With the nursemaid," she replied, barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Because I wanted them to sleep." He took a slow step closer. "Then why do you tremble?" She swallowed hard. "Because I know what you've decided to do." The colonel tilted his head, studying her. "Do you?" The rain battered the windows, drowning out her heartbeat. She had imagined this moment for months, maybe years, knowing it would come. The moment when hiding no longer mattered. The truth had waited long enough. "I can't lie anymore," she said finally. Nathaniel's expression did not change, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. "Then tell me, Elizabeth. Tell me who fathered my sons." She turned to face him at last. Her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "You already know." For a moment neither moved. The clock ticked once, twice, and then stopped, the pendulum catching mid-swing. Nathaniel's breath came slow and shallow. "Say it." "Isaiah," she whispered. The sound of the name struck like a gunshot. The colonel's face drained of color. His hand went to his chest, not for his heart, but for the pistol holstered beneath his coat. Elizabeth's breath caught. "Nathaniel, please." "You shame this house," he hissed. "You shame me." "You shamed yourself long before I did," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "You took everything from me, my youth, my freedom, my will, and called it love. I gave you sons, but not the kind you wanted." His hand tightened around the pistol. The thunder cracked outside, shaking the glass. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he growled. "Do you know what the world will say when they learn?" Her tears fell, but her tone stayed calm. "The world already knows, Nathaniel. They've seen the truth in my children's faces." For a heartbeat, he stood frozen, a soldier without orders. Then his eyes shifted toward the door. "Where is he?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. "Gone, before you kill him too." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "Then I'll find him." And as he stormed into the hallway, Elizabeth sank to the floor, clutching the locket tight to her heart, praying not for mercy, but for the storm to come quickly. Would you have told the truth, or let the lie live on to save the living? The storm had deepened by midnight, swallowing the moonlight whole. Colonel Nathaniel Ashford stepped out into the tempest, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. The rain hammered against his coat like nails. His boots sank into the mud, the earth itself seeming to resist his steps, as if warning him not to go further. Behind him, the house loomed like a wounded beast, its windows flickering with candlelight. Servants whispered behind drawn curtains. No one dared to follow. Everyone on the plantation had seen that look in the colonel's eyes before. The look that meant someone would not see morning. Isaiah was gone. The overseer had said he vanished at dusk, taking nothing but the clothes on his back. Yet Nathaniel knew better. A man doesn't flee without reason, and Isaiah had every reason. The colonel trudged past the slave quarters, his lantern light slicing through sheets of rain. The air smelled of wet earth and gunpowder. Dogs barked. In the distance, sharp, frightened sounds that broke and echoed through the trees. He unhooked one of the torches from the post and lit it from his lantern, then thrust it into the darkness ahead like a spear. "Isaiah!" His voice cut through the night. "Come out and face me like a man." No answer, only the hiss of rain and the low moan of wind weaving through the cane fields. He walked deeper, past the old mill, where shadows gathered thick and silent. Every so often, lightning would flash, painting the world white. And in those moments, he thought he saw movement. A shape darting between the trees. Nathaniel raised the pistol. "You can't run from blood," he shouted. "It calls you." "Back, no matter where you hide." And then, a voice. Calm, deep, steady. "Blood calls us all, Colonel. Even you." Nathaniel spun, the torch sputtering. Isaiah stood several yards away, rain glistening on his bare shoulders, eyes burning. With something far beyond fear, the colonel's lips curled. "You think you can take what's mine and live?" Isaiah took a slow step forward. "She was never yours to begin with." The wind roared. The torch went out. A flash of lightning revealed both men, one shaking with fury, the other calm as the storm around him. For a moment, the night held its breath. Then a gunshot shattered it apart. When the echo faded, only the rain answered back. The dogs stopped barking. The fields went still. No one in. The house slept that night, and by dawn the colonel's lantern was found in the mud, still burning, though no one was holding it. Tell me in the comments, what do you think happened in that field? The first light of dawn came slow, pale and cold, like the breath of something dying. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, thick with the scent of mud, iron, and smoke. Across the Ashford plantation, the fields lay drowned, the soil dark and glistening as if soaked in blood. Inside the house, silence ruled. Not the silence of rest, but of waiting. The servants moved quietly, their faces pale, eyes darting toward the door with every creak of the floorboards. No one knew where the colonel was. No one dared to ask. Mrs. Eliza Ashford sat at the parlor window, still in her nightgown, hair unpinned, hands trembling around a cold cup of tea. She hadn't slept, not since the shot. She had heard it echo across the fields, a single crack in the darkness, then nothing, not even the dogs. The overseer, Mr. Darnell, entered with his hat in his hands, boots caked with mud. "Ma'am," he said. Softly, "They found something out by the mill." Her eyes lifted, distant, unfocused. "What did they find?" He hesitated. "The lantern, ma'am. Still lit. And tracks. 2 sets. But only one returns." Eliza's fingers tightened around the teacup until it shattered in her hands. The overseer flinched. "We're still looking, ma'am. But I reckon..." "Reckon what, Mr. Darnell?" Her voice rose, sharp as broken glass. He swallowed. "Reckon the colonel won't be coming home, ma'am." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The ticking of the clock grew louder, echoing like a hammer. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post, its black wings dripping with rain. Eliza stood, moving toward the window. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, hollow-eyed, haunted. "And Isaiah?" she whispered. No sign of him either. A thin, bitter smile touched her lips. Then perhaps justice was done. The overseer shifted uneasily. "Justice, ma'am?" She turned, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes justice doesn't come from the law, Mr. Darnell. Sometimes it comes from the night itself." He said nothing, just lowered his head and backed out of the room. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ruined fields, the servants whispered of strange things. Voices in the cane, footsteps in the mud, the sound of a man weeping by the old mill. But when they went to look, there was no one there, only 2 sets of footprints, side by side, vanishing into the swamp. And some swore that at dusk they saw Eliza standing by the porch, gazing toward the horizon, her face calm, as if waiting for someone she already knew would never return. Tell me in the comments, do you think she knew what really happened that night? It was nearly 20 years later when the letter surfaced, yellowed, brittle, and sealed with a trembling hand. The Ashford estate had long since fallen to ruin. Vines strangled the porch rails, the roof sagged, and the once proud plantation stood as a hollow monument to grief. A man named Samuel Haynes, a local surveyor, had been tasked with appraising what was left of the property. He climbed the attic, steps cautiously, each board groaning under his weight. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Sunlight pierced through a broken window, slicing the gloom into thin silver ribbons. There, among the cobwebs and abandoned trunks, he found a cedar chest, its lock rusted, its hinges swollen with age. Inside were linens, faded photographs, and a bundle of papers tied with a black ribbon. The topmost sheet bore one name, written, in an unsteady hand, Eliza Ashford. He unfolded it carefully. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible, and what they revealed would stain the town's memory forever. To whoever finds this, it began, know that truth does not rest with the dead. The colonel was not slain. By Isaiah. He was consumed by what he could not bear to see, his own blood reflected in the man he thought beneath him. Samuel frowned, reading on. Isaiah did not flee. He stayed. He came to me after the shot, trembling, covered in rain and sorrow. He said the colonel had fired first, but the heavens turned his aim. The ball struck a stone, and the spark found the oil on his coat. Fire claimed him before forgiveness ever could. A sudden chill crept over the attic. The wind howled through the broken glass as if the house itself remembered. Samuel's lantern flickered. He read the final lines aloud. I buried them both where the cypress bends near the old mill. I could not tell the town. They would never understand that sin and love share the same skin. The twins. They are his legacy, and Isaiah's truth. The surveyor lowered the page, hands shaking. Beneath the letter lay a small locket, 2 faces inside, one white, one dark, both unmistakably similar. That night, Samuel took the letter to town, but when he tried to show it to the magistrate the next morning, the document was gone. The locket remained, but the confession had vanished. Some said the house had swallowed it. Others said someone didn't want the truth seen by daylight. Whatever the case, the past wasn't finished. Because 2 days later, a boy was seen near the ruins, his skin a shade between both men's, his eyes burning with the same haunted fire. Would you have dared to open that letter, knowing what it might reveal? By the time the century turned, the Ashford name had faded into little more than a whisper, a ghostly rumor carried by the swamp winds. But blood remembers. It never truly vanishes. And in 1912, that memory walked back through the gates. His name was Caleb Ashford, a man of 30 with pale skin, dark hair, and eyes that unsettled everyone who met them. Some said they looked gray, others swore they were near black. But in certain light they shifted, as though 2 shades warred behind his gaze. He came from New Orleans, claiming inheritance rights to the old plantation. The locals, mostly farmers and freedmen, now watched him warily as he passed through town. No one had lived on that land in decades, not since the fire that gutted the main house. But Caleb seemed drawn to it, as if called. When he arrived, the house was more skeleton than home. The roof caved inward, the walls warped with moisture, moss crawling like veins across the wood. Yet Caleb didn't flinch. He walked through each ruined room as though he'd been there before. That night, he set camp by the old mill, the same place the colonel and Isaiah had met their end. The air was still, too still. The frogs had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As the fire crackled, Caleb drew out a small, silver locket, one passed down through generations, though he never knew from where. Inside were 2 faded portraits, one white, one dark, both bearing his eyes. He stared at it until dawn. The next morning, the townsfolk who ventured near the property said the cane fields looked alive again, green, strong, whispering as if greeting an old friend. But no one could explain the strange sound that drifted from the woods that night. A low hum, a voice, then 2, twined together in something that wasn't quite prayer and wasn't quite mourning. The preacher, Reverend Holt, warned the townsfolk not to go near the land again. The Lord closed that chapter, he said. It's not meant to be read again. But curiosity runs deeper than faith. A week later, children from the nearby settlement went exploring. They returned pale, silent, clutching handfuls of white ash. When asked what they saw, they said only one thing: 2 shadows standing by the mill, holding hands. Caleb stayed for 7 more nights. Then one morning, he was gone, leaving behind only the locket, resting atop a mound of freshly turned earth. And beneath it, carved into the stone, were words that no one claimed to write. Blood remembers. Tell me, do you think the curse was real, or was it justice finally returning home? The year was 1934 when the truth finally surfaced. A truth buried beneath half a century of silence, shame, and superstition. The Ashford plantation had long been reclaimed by the swamp, its chimneys jutting from the earth like tombstones. Yet, when the Works Progress Administration sent surveyors to map the land, they uncovered something the town had tried to forget. Beneath the cypress grove near the old mill, the men unearthed a box. It was iron, sealed and corroded, but still intact. Inside lay a bundle of letters, the handwriting unmistakably Eliza Ashford's, and a final page, written in another hand entirely. The ink had not faded. It was darker, firmer, steadier. It belonged to Isaiah. "If these words are read," it began, "know that I did not hate the man who hunted me. I pitied him, for he could not see that what he called sin was only love denied its name." The letter went on to describe that night, the gunshot, the fire, the colonel's final cry. But what chilled the surveyors most was what came after. "Eliza came to me as the flames died," Isaiah wrote. "She knelt in the mud and said we would no longer hide, that the world may burn before our children ever will." He spoke of how she buried both men, husband and lover, together, side by side, in a grave unmarked by name, and then of how she wrote one last confession, meant for no one living to read. She told me the twins would grow apart in body, but not in blood. One to bear the white man's name, one to carry my heart, and in their sons, the truth would meet again. When the letters reached the county archives, historians dismissed them as fiction, a southern ghost tale too, romantic to be real. Yet, that same year, census records revealed a man named Caleb Ashford had indeed existed. His mother, a midwife from New Orleans. His father, listed only as unknown. The town went quiet after that. No one returned to the property again. Trees swallowed the ruins whole, but locals still tell stories. They say that on nights when the moon rises red over the swamp, 2 lanterns can be seen moving through the cane, side by side, never parting. Some swear they hear laughter, then weeping. And if you stand by the mill long enough, you'll see footprints appear in the wet earth, one pair lighter, one darker, walking together toward the water. Perhaps love never dies. Perhaps it simply changes its shade. Tell me in the comments, do you believe the Colonel's curse ever ended, or did his bloodline just learn to live with it?